What I'd like to compare today is a couple of rifle scopes made by Steiner, specifically two rifle scopes that are assembled in the USA. One is the Steiner T5Xi, and that's the rifle scope closest to the camera. And the other optic is a fairly new one to the market called the P4Xi. Now the T5Xi has been around for a while, and I've probably had this one for, I'd say, a couple of years now. And recently I acquired this P4Xi as I was in the market for upgrading one of my scopes. After months of researching and debating, I finally decided to take a chance on the Steiner P4Xi. And so far, I'm really impressed and happy with the choice. At the time of making this video, there wasn't a whole lot of information out there on the P4Xi. So I'm hoping to provide a bit more information on it so that if you're in a position similar to what I was in the market for a new scope, you'll be able to make a more educated decision if you're considering purchasing one of these scopes. Now, my intent isn't to persuade you to purchase one scope over the other. I am simply evaluating both scopes and will point out things that I personally like in one scope over the other. Both are great optics and both can at times be found for similar prices. As of 2018, the T5Xi can usually be found somewhere around the $1,800 price range, and I've seen it go as high, or is listed as high, as $1,979. Now, the P4Xi is actually a Euro Optics exclusive and retails for $13.99. Euro Optics reached out to Steiner and basically provided them with some design features and specs, and Steiner produced a pretty fantastic rifle scope for them. So how's the glass? That always seems to be the question, or first question, that the majority of shooters tend to ask. Now, this isn't the most important factor to me when evaluating the performance of a scope. Now, don't get me wrong, image quality is very important to me, but something like the actual mechanics, such as turret tracking, is way more important to me than the type of glass used. Having the very best glass in the world is of little use to me if the scope is unable to accurately and repeatedly track. And by tracking, I'm referring to how accurately the turrets are calibrated and if the tracking is consistent. Another reason is there is a lot of subjectivity when it comes to glass. Just do some Google searches and start reading various forums on optics, and to one person, scope A will have better glass, while to another person, scope B is going to have better glass than scope A. Our eyes also see things differently, and we all have different preferences. So I'll try to provide some more objective results, but keep in mind that some of this stuff is also just my opinion. Now, I felt the image quality was very good in both of these scopes and appropriate for the price range of these scopes. We did conduct a couple of tests to compare these scopes as well as other rifle scopes, and both of these had satisfactory results. We used a modified 1951 US Air Force resolution chart. Now, I say modified because we printed this chart off from an online source, and it's not necessarily to the same size or specs that the US Air Force may have used. This chart consists of multiple groups. Each group consists of elements, and the elements are basically a series of 3 black lines on a white background. Now, these 3 lines are in the shape of a box, and these elements vary in size. For example, element 1 will be larger than, let's say, element 6. So the idea is to see just how small of an element your scope can still resolve. If you see kind of a blurred box or a box shape instead of the 3 distinct lines, then you know that optic cannot resolve that particular element. So it does provide a bit more of an objective result rather than just looking at a tree or maybe a group of rocks and then trying to determine which scope looks better. Now, for my requirements, both of these scopes were easily able to resolve the smallest element we looked at. Now, some of you may have more extreme or stringent tests or requirements, and that's not a bad thing, but again, for my specifications, these scopes met those specs honestly quite well, and so I'm satisfied with that. I'm very happy with how both of these performed in the daylight test. Both scopes provide a very nice and bright image, and the P4Xi does seem a bit brighter though, and that could be simply because it does have a larger objective. Now, we also conducted a low light test for various scopes, which included both of these rifle scopes. The low light test consisted of what I call a contrast wheel, which is viewed on 8 power at 100 yards. Now this contrast wheel has alternating black and white lines similar to the US Air Force resolution test. And the idea is just to see how long after sunset we can still see and make out the lines on the contrast wheel. If we can't make out the lines, then we record that time and we know that that optic failed at that time. Now both scopes did really well at this low light test, and the P4Xi could actually make out the contrast wheel 2 minutes later than the T5Xi. Now 2 minutes doesn't sound like a lot, but it was really quite amazing at how much darker it would get with each passing almost second, especially that late into the evening. The P4Xi actually tied with my Schmidt & Bender PM2 at the low light test. Now I realize it's not a perfect test, and I'm in no way saying that the image quality on the P4Xi during the day is anywhere close to the PM2. But as far as being able to resolve those contrasting lines in low light, the P4Xi actually really surprised us all at how well it did at this test. So now that we've talked a bit about the daylight and low light tests we conducted, I did take both and looked at a tree at about 80 yards away in daylight. The intent was to see if I could detect any type of chromatic aberrations, and I could detect some slight fringing when looking at the dark and bare branches on this tree with the bright blue sky behind it. It was definitely more noticeable on the high end of the magnification ranges. So in this case, roughly about 14 power or higher on both optics. That's when the fringing became more apparent to me, especially when compared to something like my Schmidt & Bender Police Marksman 2, which is definitely better corrected for these color aberrations. The image quality is definitely superior in the PM2, but it's also a scope that costs considerably more than these scopes. In fact, you could buy both of these scopes for the price of the PM2. The slight fringing I could detect was not at all distracting, or at least not to the point that it would ever cause me to miss a shot. What's important to me is that the center of the optic, the part most commonly used for aiming, is crisp and clear. As long as that aiming point is as clear as possible of any aberration, then that's mainly what matters to me. And any aberrations such as chromatic or spherical, I can live with those as long as they're not so bad that they become too distracting to me. In the case of these two optics, they both had pretty clear images all the way up to the edges. I find their image quality to be quite acceptable, especially for my needs. Now, I do think the glass in these scopes is better in these magnification ranges than in the higher magnification ranges that the 5-25 by 56 T5Xi has. I own that particular scope for a while, and when compared to my Schmidt & Bender PM2, the PM2 is definitely provides a better image, especially at like 20 power or higher, and definitely looked better in lower light shooting scenarios. Even when shooting a mile though, I don't typically go higher than 20 power and have often used less than that. In fact, the 50 cal that we shoot, that one has a 10 power optic on there, and it's not an expensive optic. It's an SWFA SS 10 power. They're like $300. A little bit more magnification would definitely help us, and better glass in general, but it is doable, and so I don't typically use that high of magnification anyway. But since both the T5Xi and the PM2 were the same magnification ranges with the 56mm objectives, I decided to compare those and just see how they performed stacked up against each other. The T5Xi definitely wasn't as bright as the PM2, and increasing the magnification to 20 or higher just brought out the imperfections in the glass. It wasn't terrible by any means, but you could see the difference in, I think, the glass quality that the T series and also the P series of scopes have. It's better suited in the mid-range magnifications such as these two scopes. Let's talk about the turrets on these scopes. In this section, I'm going to discuss the overall appearance of the turrets, the method utilized to indicate the turret revolution, the adjustment range, the zero stop, how to reset the turrets, the accuracy in tracking, and also how the turrets sound and feel. Now, I really like the look of the T5Xi turrets. They are pretty low profile and have a nice aggressive look to them. The P4Xi turrets I really like as well, and they kind of remind me of the older Steiner military series of scopes, not to be confused with the M5 series. Those turrets look a little bit different. I still like the look of them because I do prefer a lower profile turret. These tactical style scopes are already big enough as is that I try to keep the height as low as possible so that it can still fit in either my gun cases or my Eberly stock backpack. It's something to consider when it comes to selecting a scope. Is it going to be low profile enough to fit inside your gun case? Is it going to be low profile enough to easily remove from your built-in scabbard, such as the one in my Eberly stock? Now both of these scopes have their own way of telling you where you are when you dial the turret. So as far as how many mils you've dialed and the revolution that you're on, the P4Xi uses a similar method to the older military scopes. Again, not to be confused with the M5 series of scopes that have a completely different turret design. Now if you look at the turret itself, you can see that the bottom row of numbers is etched in white, and then the top row is in green. And we can see here there's a little circle there. So as I start to dial, and as we get to 9, it starts turning green. Once we get to our 10th mil, that circle is completely filled in with green, matching the top row of numbers, and therefore indicating that you're on your second revolution. Now in the military style of scopes, there was, instead of a circle here that changed colors, there was a little pin that popped out. So not only could you visually see that you were on your second revolution, but you could actually feel. And the numbers were a little bit different. I think the bottom row was white, the top row was gray. But anyway, kind of the same concept there. Now the P4Xi is advertised to have 30 mils of elevation adjustment. I have 19 left after my 0. And the windage turret has 16 mils of adjustment. The windage also indicates, you can see over here, which direction you're going. So as you can see, I'm dialing right there, left there, and then it ends with a 5. So either way, it'll end on a 5 if you're going left or right. Alright, so I actually considered a more affordable scope with the SCR reticle, which is the Burris XTR2. But when I saw these T5Xi turrets, I was just completely sold. I think it's fairly safe to say that at some point a lot of us have gotten lost in our turret. Pretty much everyone I've shot with at some point has gotten lost in their turrets. A classic example is someone shoots a bunch, forgets to return their turret to 0. They then go home, and upon the next shooting session they discover that the turret is not at their 100-yard 0. Well, if the scope's not equipped with the 0 stop, and if you don't remember which revolution that turret was on for your original 0, it might require some verification. Another example is shooting multiple targets at various ranges and simply getting lost in the turret. This seems to be a bit more common or prevalent with turrets that have 5 mils per revolution. If it's equipped with the 0 stop, you can obviously crank your turret down until you hit that 0 stop, start over, and then index your firing solution from there. The T5Xi has a really cool turret design that helps you know how many mils you've dialed. You can see in this small window here a series of numbers, and that tells you exactly how many mils you've dialed. So as you continue to dial your turret, you can see those numbers up there tell you exactly, I'm on 6 mils air, 7. And as we keep going, it's when we get to our 12th revolution, or 12th mil, you can see that window change numbers there. And then it proceeds from there. This one goes up to just, I think 23.1 is what I have left after my initial 100-yard 0. The T5Xi has an advertised 34 mils of adjustment on the elevation turret and 15 mils on the windage. And then just like the P4Xi, you can glance over here and it does have numbers as well as the letter to tell you which way you're dialing. And then this one has a, let's see if we can see it there. Yeah. So in between 5 right and 5 left, there is a blank space. So the P4Xi had a 5 there telling you you're on your 5th mil, depending on which way you've dialed. In this case, it just leaves it blank. Now both scopes have a zero stop and both allow you to dial a few tenths of a mil past your actual zero, as you can see here. Zeroing and resetting your turrets is fairly simple. Once you dial the amount of elevation adjustment and windage that you need, essentially there's two set screws in both of these turrets, meaning in the T5Xi, P4Xi, it's both the same process. But basically you loosen those two screws, you can then move the turret and it won't make any adjustments because you've loosened it. Do not remove the turret, you don't have to, just loosen the screws. Keep the screws in place, you don't need to back them out all the way, you just need to loosen them. That'll allow you to then turn the turret freely. Obviously it won't make clicks like this just did. Line it back up to your zero, tighten the screws, and you're done. So it's pretty simple on both. The windage is the same concept. You'll loosen the two screws, slip that turret back to zero, tighten the screws, and you're done. So very, very similar on the P4Xi as the T5Xi, and very, very simple to reset your turrets. Now, how well did these turrets track? We conducted a tall target test and the results were actually really good for both of these rifle scopes. The T5Xi did have a bit of a rough start with reports of the tracking being off. Now, Steiner warrantied these scopes and replaced the turrets with an improved design. If you do have an older T5Xi, you can send that scope in and Steiner will replace those turrets with Gen 2 turrets for free. You can tell by looking at the top of the turret, and if it has Steiner's logo, then you know you have the Gen 2 turrets. Let me see if I can zoom in on there. So as long as you can see that logo above up, those are the Gen 2 turrets. And so if you do have a Gen 1 scope or a scope with Gen 1 turrets, you can definitely send that in and Steiner will take care of you and get those replaced at absolutely no cost to you. Now these turrets tracked extremely well and accurate enough to where I did not feel that I needed to input any type of correction factor into my ballistic app. So even if you do own a scope that doesn't dial 100% accurate, as long as it's repeatable, you can account for that error, and most decent ballistic solvers can be programmed to account for it. So when you need a firing solution, your ballistic app will actually factor in that error on your turrets and have an account for that when providing you with that firing solution. Now the P4Xi had great results too and tracked every bit as good as the T5Xi. Now I haven't owned the P4Xi for very long, and as a result I haven't been able to test its repeatability to the same extent as the T5Xi. But so far it's been performing quite well and the turrets have been very accurate and repeatable. As far as the feel of the turrets, I actually prefer the feel of the P4Xi turrets. Now the T5Xi turrets aren't bad by any means, but I've always been a huge fan of the Schmidt & Bender double turn turrets and how audible and tactile that they are. The P4's turrets feel closer to that than the T5's. There is a bit more resistance in the turrets on the P4 than the T5 series, and the clicks are definitely more audible. Both you could really dial without the need to absolutely be looking at your turret. The clicks are both crisp enough to feel them without having to look at each individual click and count those. I like the turret design better on the T5Xi, but prefer the way the P4 feels and sounds. So let me give you a comparison here, and I'll try not to talk so you can hear the difference between the two turrets. So hopefully you can see what I'm talking about as far as how much more audible the P4Xi clicks are, and there is quite a bit more resistance, it feels like, to them. Both of them, I don't think you're going to have an issue as far as those turrets turning while they're in like a range bag, or if you have it on a sling and you're carrying it. I don't think either of those turrets is easily going to turn and mess up your zero. I really like the way both of them feel. They're very tactile. I would not say that they're really mushy by any means. The P4Xi just feels closer to the Schmidt and Bender turrets that I really like. And so as far as turret design, I like the T5Xi because I thought that was a really innovative design and really creative in showing you exactly how many mils you've dialed, and you don't even have to worry about the revolution that you're on because you just need to look at your turret and see those numbers and you know exactly how many mils you've dialed. The P4Xi, it's still a pretty cool design because you don't have to worry about counting those horizontal indicator lines like on other scopes. And sometimes those can be a bit tricky because you're wondering, okay, is that the fourth revolution or is that kind of the fifth? It can be kind of hard to tell. So I like that it's straightforward and tells you that, okay, it's on green, so you know you're on your second revolution, or it's white, you know that you're on your first revolution. This one is about 10 mils per revolution, while this one is, I guess you could say 12 mils. But as far as the T5Xi, I don't really think of that one as which revolution it's on. I think of that one as just simply telling you the amount of mils you've dialed. Alright, let's talk about some of the other features that the rifle scope has. Now the nice thing about the T5Xi is you do get a free throw lever for your magnification ring, and then you get these nice Tenebrex flip-up covers which are really durable, really strong. I like how flat they lay down. The P4Xi doesn't come with any of that stuff, so you'll have to find your own scope lens covers. As far as the side focus, you have a 25 meter setting. It goes all the way up to infinity. And then you have 11 illumination settings with an off setting in between each number. So it's nice because you don't have to go all the way back to, let's say if that were off, you don't have to dial the illumination setting all the way back there. If you have a particular illumination setting that you know works well for your whatever purpose you have intended, you can kind of leave it on an off position right by that number and then dial it back to on. Illumination is nice in both the P4Xi and the T5Xi, very similar. And again, same reticle configuration, both have the SCR reticle in these particular models. Now the P4Xi has a little bit different parallax adjustment here. So the T5Xi started at 25 meters, this one is a 50 meter, and then goes straight to infinity there with no numbers indicating the settings in between. And really those numbers on here anyway are just a recommendation. I've had scopes that are way off, and so with this style of scope, yes, it would be nice to get a rough idea of where that adjustment needs to be, but in reality, like I said, those are just estimates on where that side focus should be located. And really to determine that you are parallax free is to put the rifle scope on your target, make sure the rifle is as steady as possible, and then move your head up and down or side to side. If that reticle is dancing all over the place, then you know you have parallax issues. If your head is moving up and down side to side and that reticle stays fixed, then you know you're parallax free. Now the illumination setting, let me see if I can zoom in a tiny bit more here. So we actually have 3 off settings, which is pretty cool, and then an off setting in between each illumination setting. So we can see here we have the night vision settings, then we're to another off position, and again the line in between each dot indicates that the illumination is off, and then our third off position. So just like the T5Xi, you can kind of find what setting works best for you in the low light conditions that you'll be shooting in, and then you can just click to the next shut off line, or in this case you do have some off settings as well. Magnification ring is very smooth on the P4Xi, very similar to the T5Xi, and as well as the side focus, very smooth adjustments. Just a side note on the illumination on both the T5Xi and the P4Xi. On the highest setting on both of these rifle scopes, I had a very difficult time seeing the lit portion of the reticle. It's really meant for low light shooting on these style of rifle scopes. And the P4Xi does have a couple of dots there that are hollowed out. I believe those are the night vision settings, or recommended settings for night vision, while the T5Xi Steiner has stated that the lower settings are night vision compatible. As I mentioned earlier, it's not really my intent to persuade you to purchase one of these rifle scopes over the other. They both offer some great features, and I guess if it came down to only being able to have one of them, and I could only find them at their typical street price, then I'd have to say I'd go with the P4Xi. It's at least about $400 less than the lower price you can typically find the T5Xi for, and it's a lot of scope for the money. I do like the innovative turret design of the T5Xi, and if you need a slightly lighter scope with a shorter overall length, and the turret design is worth it to you, then the T5Xi is still an excellent choice. But for the value you get based on the amount of dollars spent, I do think the P4Xi is a great optic and a better value. They both have similar daylight performance in terms of image quality. The P4Xi did beat the T5Xi by a couple of minutes in the low light test we conducted, but the T5Xi still did quite well. Both have accurate and repeatable tracking. I do prefer the feel and sound of the P4Xi's turrets, but the T5s aren't bad at all. So if price is your driving factor, then the P4 is seriously a lot of scope for the money. If the slightly more compact design, smaller objective size, and turret design of the T5Xi are worth it to you for the extra money that you're going to typically spend, then go for it. Again, both of these scopes are really great options, and I'm really happy with both of them. Anyway, I hope this has helped answer some questions that you may have had, and hope that this has helped you make a decision whether or not it's even choosing one of these rifle scopes. Hopefully it's clarified a few things for you.